Good morning, everyone. My name is Marquita Gujvoy, Assistant Director for Technology and Training for the Clayton County Library System. On behalf of Director Rosalind Lett, I'd like to welcome you to the first installment of our Careers in Coding series. Today, you'll hear from Christian Lowe, a graduate of Texas A&M University and a software engineer by trade. He will discuss his technological background, how he got into coding, and the inspiration behind his current project, the Green Book app. With that said, I present to you Mr. Christian Lowe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm super excited to talk to you today about my career in tech and my app and my startup as a whole. So thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you all today. I super appreciate it. So yeah, just to get into my background. Sorry, my slide isn't quite working at the moment. Um, there we are. Who am I? I'm the founder and creator of the Green Book Project. Prior to founding the Green Book Project, I was a software engineer at a company called Change.org, based in San Francisco, California, where I worked with digital activists and organizers to affect real world change and movements in the real world. As Marquita said, I'm alumnus of Texas A&M University. And a fun fact about me is that I am a little bit of a tech geek. So what is the Green Book Project? Well, the Green Book Project is a mobile app that I created that helps folks from marginalized groups find inclusive businesses while also avoiding discrimination. So a way that I love to think about it when I talk to people is that think Yelp, but if you were going to sort of rate businesses based on their inclusivity specifically. And a really common question I get when I say this is, well, who's it for? Who's included in those marginalized groups? And in short, kind of everyone. So the Green Book Project was created to ensure that no one ever has to live in fear of facing discrimination because of who they are. So anyone can use the Green Book Project, whether they face discrimination because of their race or the color of their skin, whether it's because of who they love, whether it's because of their gender, or because of their disability. And it's also useful for folks who have friends and who love people who fit into those groups. So it's absolutely open for allies and everyone who wants to ensure that their friends and family can stay safe when visiting new places. And with that, I feel like it's really important for me to talk about how did this all start? What made me wake up one day and say, hey, I'm gonna write or code a mobile app. So I have to rewind pretty far back to where I grew up. So I grew up just outside of Houston, Texas, in a mostly kind of white part of town. And as a little kid, as a little black kid growing up, just outside Houston, I unfortunately spent a good portion of my early life trying to avoid racism. And so a lot of my earliest experiences in life were realizing that I was treated differently from my best friends who were white. And one of the earliest examples of this in my mind was when I would go to the local gym at my church growing up. I was a member of that church from the time that I was born. I had three older siblings who had also grown up in that church. And at that gym, there was an older white gentleman who would actually not allow me or my siblings to rent gear as the only Black children that were able to attend that gym. And so one of my earliest life hacks for getting around this was to actually wait around the corner and then have one of my white friends go for me and rent out the equipment or the basketballs that we wanted to play with, and then just kind of come back and bring it to me. And so I was kind of like crafty, I guess, in that way, in that a lot of my early experiences with navigating racism was, I have to just kind of hack my way around this, or I have to figure out a little creative way of getting around this. And because that's the context that I grew up with, it almost felt really normal. It just was as inconvenient as maybe getting rained on, as that's what how discrimination kind of showed up in my life. But that all kind of started to change in my senior year of college. So in my senior year of college, I studied abroad on a program called Semester at Sea, which is a multi-country study abroad program where I studied aboard a ship that would take me across the world with my classmates to different countries, and we would get to compare the politics and the cultures and the ways of living from country to country. And it was a really amazing experience. But one of the oddest experiences that I had while on this program was that I actually realized I felt way safer in many of the countries we were visiting than I did in my own neighborhood back home in Texas. And it was kind of this weird sense of newfound privilege. I realized that in many cases, I wasn't being looked at as being dangerous or based on certain stereotypes. People saw me and they kind of just saw me. In fact, one of my oddest experiences was going to a club in South Africa with one of my friends who was white. And as we went into the club, my white friend was actually stopped and searched, but they allowed me to go through. And it was the first time in my life that anything like that ever happened. So it was this weird kind of paradigm shift for me, where I was the one kind of experiencing the privilege rather than the discrimination in that case. But as I'm kind of hinting at, while I felt safer abroad than I did back home, for some of my friends, they still had to worry about discrimination. So for my friends who were women of color, who were queer, who were disabled, or who were from like the wrong caste, they still had to experience the same kind of discriminatory stories that I grew up with back home in Texas. And while I could see my various privileges protecting me as a sort of taller American male abroad, those weren't the same experiences that my friends were having. And this became most extremely apparent to me during my visit to Mumbai, where I went to where I got the opportunity to visit a safe house called the Kranti House. The Kranti House houses young women who have been the victims of sexual violence or gender-based violence. And going around Mumbai with them and getting to have these new friends, I really saw the juxtaposition between my experiences and theirs, how they experienced sexism because they were women, and how they experienced discrimination because of that they were in the wrong caste. In some cases, even being told to leave restaurants or businesses completely because they were not the customer that the business owner wanted. And this all like really broke my heart. I don't think anyone should have to grow up or live their life kind of always trying to worry about whether or not they're going to be the victim of discrimination. It sucks. And it made me think of something. Is there an app for that? I grew up in the 2000s, and so I very distinctly remember the Apple commercial with the tagline, "Is there an app for that?" Or there's an app for that, I'm sorry, that kind of to sell the whole ecosystem of Apple and the wide range of tools available in the Apple App Store to navigate one's daily life. But after getting back to the ship that I sailed on with my 100 megabytes of internet, I did some pretty extensive searching trying to figure out if there was an app for the problems that my friends and I had to face in our daily lives. But as I searched and I searched, I unfortunately found that there wasn't anyone solving this problem, that this wasn't a problem that was seen as super important by the tech industry. But I did come upon something pretty interesting in my endless Google searches, and that was this old civil rights era publication called the Negro Motorist Green Book. So what is the Negro Motorist Green Book? The Negro Motorist Green Book oftentimes is called the original Green Book, especially for us who at my startup, was the civil rights era publication that was compiled by Victor Hugo Green and his wife, Alma Duke Green. Victor was a US postal worker who oftentimes had to travel for his work, usually I believe it was in New York State, but oftentimes to other parts of the country as well. And so in his travels, having to go through to all these different places, he started to just compile a list of places that would serve African American travelers like himself, and places that maybe weren't so safe or maybe needed to be avoided. And this quickly became really popular with his friends and family, who he originally created the list for. So much so that they started to say, hey, let's share it with our friends and family. And it became so popular that he was kind of forced into making this an actual publication that was printed and released to the public. The original Green Book was so effective in listing the various places that catered to African Americans throughout the United States and at other points in time, Canada and Mexico, that many African American travelers treated it like as an essential tool when they were traveling, the same way you might have road flares or something to check the tire pressure in your car. It was seen as an essential tool for African Americans if you were traveling on the open roads, where you might face discrimination or violence because of the color of your skin. Unfortunately, it did start to fall out of circulation, but for a relatively good reason. Towards the end of in the middle of the 1960s, Congress passed landmark civil rights public legislation that outlawed discrimination in businesses and in public services. And at the time, many people felt that the original Green Book was no longer needed. And with the death of Victor Hugo Green in the early 60s, I believe, it simply ran out of steam. But after learning about this book and the way that it saved countless lives, I felt like we still kind of need it. I've had so many experiences traveling across America where I've felt unsafe or been told directly that I was unsafe because of the color of my skin. And I know that my experience is not limited to simply my own experience as a cis straight African American man, and it's shared by many different people who have different intersecting identities. And so I said, if the tech industry isn't going to build something like this, then I think I will. But there was a minor problem. And that is, I had absolutely no idea how to code. As a international studies major, you might be surprised to learn that I actually never took a coding class while I was in college. And so coding wasn't exactly something that was in my forte or skills that I had in my back pocket. But thankfully, in this age of information and technology, coding is actually much more accessible, I think, than at any other point in its history. When I set out on with the idea that I was going to make this app, I just started researching and figuring out how can I learn how to code so I could get something, maybe a prototype or an MVP or something out there. And these are some of the resources I found. I learned about CS50, online course taught by Harvard University on the basics of computer science that I took, and it opened my eyes as to how intuitive computer science could be. I also used Khan Academy, which has an amazing set of courses on basics of programming in JavaScript and CS fundamentals. I also used Free Code Camp, a nonprofit that has literally thousands of tutorials and lessons on how to code. And then I eventually realized that I liked coding so much and that I really wanted to polish my skills, that I attended a short coding boot camp in Houston called Digital Crafts. And in all this time, while I was learning how to code, I was slowly building out my idea. I was figuring out the screen mockups. I was interviewing people who could be potential users. And I was just trying to get things up in place. In the meantime, while I was working on the app, I did get a job at change.org. I was actually not even expecting to get the job, but I needed something to pay my student loans in the meantime while I worked on the app. And so I found this amazing company and worked at change.org for about 2.5 years, living in San Francisco and Oakland, California. And after about 4 years and 8 months from the time that I first had this idea, and of course, having consumed absolutely thousands of cups of coffee and on hundreds of weekends and late nights, I finally launched this app to the Apple App Store last November. You can't tell in the picture here, but this was actually after a weekend of all-nighters, so I looked pretty tired. So that's kind of the story of how the Green Book Project came to be. And I think it's important now that knowing the context of how this app came to be and its origin, now we talk about how it actually works and what it does. So the Green Book Project, as I mentioned before, is not too dissimilar from Yelp. It crowdsources reviews from different from users and communities, and users can use these reviews to determine whether or not a location is safe or inclusive for people who look like them or not. It also centers into intersectionality. One of the earliest realizations when I was building the app was that my experience in a location is going to be way different from my sister, who's a queer Black woman. And her experiences are going to be way different from one of my best friends, who's a non-binary Latinx person. And so I felt that it was really important to build this concept of intersectionality using these things called hashtags, which are almost like, intersections are almost like hashtags to filter reviews, and so that users can gain a better insight into how they might experience a place personally based on their own background and intersecting identities. And then lastly, a big goal of ours is to help support inclusive businesses. There are hundreds of businesses and thousands of businesses out there who are trying to be inclusive, who are trying to be welcoming to customers of all identities. And we really want to support their work and boost them up. So I thought I'd give a little example about how a user might use the Green Book Project. So meet Tina here. Tina is an African-American woman living in Austin, Texas, and she's only recently moved there. So since she moved there, she's been trying to try lots of new restaurants and eat at least one new place every single week. Being an African-American woman, Tina does sometimes have to worry about discrimination, but she really tries hard not to make it stop her from trying new things and going new places. So Tina's an adventurous type of person. But unfortunately, Tina recently had a bad experience at a place called Mike's Pizzeria. She's not sure whether it was due to racism or not, and she really doesn't want to jump to conclusions. She doesn't want to accuse someone of racism if maybe it was just an off night or something else was going on. But she couldn't help but notice that despite being the first customer to arrive at the restaurant for dinner time, she was served long after several other customers were sold. And then also, her server seemed kind of rude and didn't seem to want to answer any of the questions that she had for the server, which made her feel like she wasn't a valued customer. So Tina hears about this thing called the Green Book Project, and she decides to download it. So Tina finds Mike's Pizzeria on the Green Book Project, and she starts reading some of the reviews, and she kind of finds that things aren't actually so great there. Tina quickly discovers that Mike's Pizzeria actually has kind of a pattern of discrimination in which the owner promotes racist behavior among his staff. And Tina also learns, which she wouldn't have known from just visiting herself as an abled person, that the business also discriminates against folks that have disabilities, which is not always something that a person who doesn't have a disability will pick up on. Kind of be able to understand that this is kind of a pattern of behavior, Tina decides that she also wants to write about her own experience at Mike's Pizzeria and warn other users of to steer clear if they are a person of color or a person with disabilities. So the next time Tina decides to try a new restaurant in Austin, she decides to check the place out on the Green Book Project first. And she actually learns that this location that she's looking up is actually a safe spot for both people of color and folks with disabilities. And so Tina's able to stay safe and continue to be adventurous and try out new restaurants without having to constantly worry whether or not she will have to experience degraded or lesser service because of the color of her skin or of her other identities. And that's pretty much how the Green Book Project works in a nutshell. Um, so now that you know how it works and the story of the Green Book Project, I thought I'd share a little bit about where we're going from here. So first of all, we're growing really fast. From launching last year in November of 2020, we've had 3,800 installs. Actually, this is already out of date since I created this presentation. We've had 99 more installs. Um, there are 215 different locations across the app that have been reviewed by our users. And then our team is also growing, and we recently made, I recently made 3 new hires to the team. So we're growing and being able to offer better features and better support for our users. We're also raising funds, not at the moment, but soon we're actually launching an equity crowdfunding campaign, which would allow our own community and people who support our mission to invest in us. This is really it's atypical of how most startups in the tech world are funded. Most are funded by private venture capital investments, and that means that unfortunately everyday people aren't allowed to benefit from the success of these startups. So we're really excited to be doing an equity crowdfunding campaign so that our supporters can invest in us and benefit when we succeed. We're also going to be using the funds that we raise to build new features to keep users safe from discrimination. Unfortunately, I am the only programmer at our company. So with this money, we'll also be able to hire more great employees and other programmers and developers so that we can build features much more quickly than just me alone. And then we're also working to partner with businesses. So at the moment, we're forming a network of small business partners who are kind of our go-to contacts when it comes to businesses that are doing inclusion really, really well. And our goal is to actually help businesses that aren't doing so well. We know that sometimes issues of discrimination are not always intentional or can sometimes come from a place of simply being a blind spot. And so we're working to actually build a digital library of tactics and strategies for businesses who want to be inclusive to all customers so that they can use that library and those resources to make their own businesses more inclusive to people from all identities. And then lastly, in late 2023, we're hoping to launch a customized training program for small businesses so that not only will they have access to a digital library and resources, but they'll also be able to get real-time coaching from our staff about how to do inclusion better in their business practices and in their employment strategies. And that's pretty much it for what I have. You can also follow us in our journey on social media. We're posting pretty often now. We're actually, funnily enough, most active on TikTok, kind of trying to get the whole Gen Z crowd. We're also active on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So absolutely, please follow us, give us a shout out, definitely boost us to your friends and family. And I think now is just time for questions.
Yep, absolutely. We've got quite a few.
Awesome.
Let me see if I can scroll back up to the very beginning. So the first one is Houston still mostly majority white? How does that impact your work with this app, if at all?
So actually, it's not. Houston is actually, I believe, the second or first most diverse city in the U.S. now. And this has actually been true for a while. But the specific area that I grew up in, Houston, was a zip code that tended to be more on the white side and less and a little bit less culturally diverse than most other parts of Houston. And in terms of how that affects our app, it's actually really great. We actually have a lot of users in the Houston area who are doing a great job of showing us the businesses that they find to be most inclusive in this area.
Cool. Da, 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 da. Do you make money with the app at all?
At the moment, no. In fact, I would probably say I make like negative $18 a day. um, at the moment, this is what we call a bootstrapped startup in the tech industry, and so all the funds that we're using to keep the servers alive and hire people are actually from my own personal savings. But after we raise, we are hoping to be able to actually start making revenue by doing what I mentioned in the previous slide of training businesses for a small service fee.
Cool. Couple compliments, a couple people that said they love the app and they've already downloaded it, having read about it. Um, has anyone ever made a false claim in the app? So like they reported a business as inclusive, but then in reality it wasn't?
Um, So that's a bit of a tricky question to answer, in part because it's hard for us to verify necessarily whether a person's experience was true or false. What we can only know is that that's how likely that person perspective of the events occurred. And so one of the things that we really stress is that it's good for a place to have many, many reviews because it's much less likely that a lot of people are have a skewed perspective or are lying or anything like that than one person alone. But unfortunately, we're not really in a place where we're able to necessarily track down a person and ask them, like, "Are you sure your review is correct?" But yes, so far our users do their best to be objective. We actually have very few businesses in the app that are marked as being unsafe specifically. In most cases, people rate businesses as being inclusive because that's the businesses they want to tell their friends and family about.
Cool. Well, I guess you can answer a couple of these questions. Someone asked if you could go back to the slide that had all of your social media handles on it.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Um, and then there were two questions. One of them was just how can they contact you? And then the other one was if someone wanted to join your team or just volunteer their time, how would they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for contacting, you can absolutely contact us across all of our social medias. We also have an email address called contact at thegreenbook.io. I don't know if I can write that anywhere,
I
but
got it.
okay, awesome. Um, and so, yeah, you can feel free to contact us on any of those channels. We try to answer as many any questions we can within 48 hours, but we do get a lot of messages each day. So please forgive us if we take a little bit longer than that to respond. We're a small team. So, and then the other question was about hiring, I believe.
Yeah, if they wanted to, well, yeah, are you hiring? Which I think you kind of covered. But if they just wanted to volunteer in the interim, how would they do that?
Yeah, so we are not hiring at this exact moment just because of the limitations of my personal funds. But we are hoping to hire again starting in June of 2022. Other than that, we don't really work too much off volunteer hours. We always want to make sure that people are compensated for the work they do. But if you do really want to support our mission and what we're trying to do, sharing our posts on social media and just writing as many reviews as you can in the app are both of those things do so much to further our goal and further us along this journey. And also, yeah, if you do want to, if you're really itching to work for us in the future, do feel free to just send us an email and say, hey, like, once you're hiring again, hit me up. And we'll absolutely make sure to keep you saved in our database for later.
Cool. That looks like it's it for all of the questions. Any last thoughts you want to get out?
Yeah, just please share us with your friends and family. It's not just about keeping ourselves safe, but keeping our communities safe from discrimination and from harm. And every review that you write actually does that. It actually helps someone else have a good experience somewhere and avoid potential traumatic experiences. So, yes, please share us with everyone you know. Absolutely download our app if you haven't. And yeah, follow us on social media so you can follow us along this journey. And also, thank you so much for allowing me to speak to you. That's a lot, but thank you.
No problem. Thank you for agreeing. Yeah, often we reach out to people and they're just kind of like, oh, what, we do that public library thing. So thank you. Yep, she works in the travel and tourism industry and created a program that she says ties directly into this. So she definitely will be reaching out to work with you.
Awesome,
Her name
thank you.
is Aisha White, is what it is.
Awesome, look forward to meeting you, Aisha.
Yay, look at that. Library making connections. There's like any kind of residual, like, 10% finder's fee. I'm kidding. Yeah.
We'll do our best.
Well, again, thank you so much for agreeing to present. Thank you to everyone that watched us. And, if you missed the live stream, you can always catch the re-air right on the library's channel, youtube.com/Clayton County Library System. All right. Have a good day.
There you go.